Uh, right, comrades, I want to welcome you to this meeting. We're discussing a very crucial, immediate issue: the election in Sri Lanka and what it means. I particularly welcome the comrades who are here. Well, one comrade so far from Sri Lanka, Comrade Darusha. There's also Comrade Swastika, who I hope is on her way. And I'd also like to welcome several Indian comrades who are participating. Um, I don't need to remind anybody here that we're living in a very, very unstable world. We have two major wars in operation at the present time, apart from all the minor ones. We have complete political turmoil just about everywhere in the world. And there's probably no greater instability than the Indian subcontinent. We have, of course, the long-running civil war in Myanmar. We have in Pakistan, the elected prime minister languishing in jail and a military junta ruling. In India, the Prime Minister Modi, to everyone's surprise, lost his majority and is dependent now on very fickle and unreliable coalition allies. And of course, in Bangladesh, we had the massive, huge youth uprising, which forced the Prime Minister of 15 years, Hasina Sheikh, to flee the country. And now, of course, Sri Lanka. We saw 2 years ago the aragalaya, a huge, rare, nationwide uprising, which had the slogan "Gotta Go," Gota being the nickname of the president, Gotta Go, and he, just like Hasina more recently, he too had to flee the country. There's many examples. I'm making a little scrapbook list of the number of national leaders who've had to flee the country in fear of their own working class. Well, from Marcos in Philippines to the Shah of Iran to Ceausescu in Romania, and as I say, the two latest examples very, very close to the area we're talking about. Both Rajapaksa in Sri Lanka and Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh. And now we have the situation in Sri Lanka where Kota did indeed go, and the workers have learned from the experience since then because they got an even more draconic regime, which replaced the Rajapaksa regime. It was a buddy, a crony of Rajapaksa, which then negotiated an absolutely draconic deal with the IMF, which has reduced the living standards of the masses still further and caused indescribable hardship. And from the experience of the Aragalaya, it's clear that the Sri Lankan masses have learned that we need to go further than that because they have elected now, they've looked and found a political solution. And the political solution was to elect the new government, to elect the president, Dissanayake, who was leader of the JVP, which had previously led to bloody uprisings, almost indiscriminate slaughter, and has now adopted a much more moderate and mild reformist program. And but nevertheless, what this shows is that the masses in struggle have learned that they need a political solution, and whether they have found one or not is what we'll be analysing and dealing with tonight. So we're very lucky to have, well, we've invited two speakers. One is Swastika, who is a trade union leader. She's a woman. She's of the Tamil minority, and she's a very fiery and very effective militant workers' leader. And we also have Comrade Danusha, who we've also seen before, who is a Marxist economist. And I'm going to ask Danusha now, if he's ready, to please open up the discussion.
Thank you so
Danusha, are you
much,
there?
Comrade Roger, and everyone else who's joining in. And I would also like to thank again for having such keen interest about the affairs that is happening or ongoing in Sri Lanka right now. So, well, to begin, maybe I should start with a quote by Engels, where in the selected correspondence, Engels explains how the Marxist or the Marxist discourse views political change in a much more dynamic way. So, in brief, what he says is that in any political movement, the end result, or what happens in the end after taking into all uh, political interests of different class fractions into consideration, after all that crisscrossing of different interests, what comes after all that is quite politically unconscious. So something quite similar to that is happening right now in the context of Sri Lanka, where former uh, Marxist as well as nationalist, chauvinist, I should say, on one hand, uh, underprivileged or the more oppressed class basis of the JVP was also uh, uh, fueling the Sinhala chauvinist sentiments especially during the 1980s, and now they have taken quite a moderate stance on both those aspects. I should say, on one hand, on their left-wing politics and also on their chauvinist aspirations. But we cannot rule out the seriousness of the racial sentiments with regard to entertaining the Sinhala Buddhist majority, which we are seeing glimpse of that every day in many instances. But if I move back to what they're going to do with the IMF program and the political economy in general, to go back to uh, what I quoted about Engels, what we see with the NPP right now is that they're giving absolutely contradictory stances about very key economic questions with regard to, for instance, the IMF. Certain fractions in the NPP, which is uh, the president-elects or the president's the political party, and it looks like that they will be they are heading towards getting securing the majority in the parliamentary elections also, which is scheduled to be held in November, early November. They are having giving out very contradictory statements about key issues, for instance, about the IMF. So at the moment, what we see is that the NPP is quite recoiling on their earlier rhetoric of challenging the establishment, especially, let's say, with regard to the corrupt practices which they were right throughout their political history. They were attributing most of the grievances of the masses to the corruption that has engulfed which is like a general practice in the third world. But what we are seeing right now, despite the fact that they came to power with that, they were riding that wave of the rhetoric against corruption. Once they have come to power, they have backtracked on their own principles and own election promises. So we are seeing NPP being captured again by the establishment or the business elite, and their interests are in fact dominating over the body of, or the mass of the people. So if I give you an example, now on September 19th, just 2 days before the election, actually it was a violation of election laws also, unimaginable, because the creditors themselves were involved in this process. The then president, that was Ranil Wickremesinghe, an agent of neoliberal order and economic imperialism, he came out and said that they have finalized the deal with the foreign creditors, the holders of the international sovereign bonds, which amount to around 12.5 billion. So, which itself is a very draconian deal. And the press release came out not just from the part of the government, but also by the creditors. So creditors were very much involved in that process, or in the election process, where they were trying to give out the impression to the oncoming government that whatever the government that comes to power, it is that this particular deal that should go forward, and nothing else, because it was framed in a way as if now unofficially the IMF has also agreed to this new arrangement, and the government and the creditors have already come into an agreement. And mind you, the agreement is itself, like what Comrade Roger explained here, is absolutely draconian, and it's quite, I mean, the audacity to come up with such a proposal is quite unimaginable. To give you an example, they have put up a clause in that particular agreement that the creditors or the ISB holders will shift from the United States New York law, which is currently applicable to the ISBs issued by the Sri Lankan government. They will shift from that to the UK law, or yes, so that the legal framework governing the ISBs. Now, all this is not explained why they are actually saying this. They have just said in the agreement they wish to shift the law that is governing the ISBs, which is currently the New York law or the US law, from that to the UK law. So what we clearly know is that for a fact that the UK law does not allow, in the case of a bankruptcy or in case of a inability to repay the debt, there is no legal provision that the borrower has some scope to cancel that debt. But in the case of New York law, it is very clear that those legal provisions are there. So this is the type of agreement which Ranil Wickremesinghe, on the eve of the elections, came out and declared to the Sri Lankan public as if it's such a great news, as if such a massive it's a particular a move that would bring so much of benefit to the public. But obviously it's the other way around, and it's unimaginable how low these massive global financial capitalists, the state or the level they have gone down to, considering the fact that they are dealing with a country where over 30% of the people are suffering below the poverty line, and they are willing to go down to that level even to interfere in the election process, to stamp down or to register their the agreement which they wish to actually impose on Sri Lanka. So yes, the point. So now when it comes to the NPP, there were some of the voices within the NPP, especially the economic council head, was quite critical of the initial deal which was struck between the government and the ISB holders, which is not very much different to what this very latest deal which the former president announced. we can say it's almost the same. But then there are some other voices which was not so critical. They were accepting the parameters drawn down by the IMF on the debt sustainability analysis, and they were quite willing to follow those criteria and work their way within those criteria. Whereas there are other factions within the NPP itself who are very critical of it. But I would just also like to add here that those critical views were not originating within the NPP, because those, I mean, I don't think I have time to go into the details of all this, especially if I just give you one specific example quickly. So the IMF declared that Sri Lanka will be sustainable in debt if the country reaches 95% debt ratio within another 10 or by 2038, which is 10 years down the line. No, sorry, 2032, after 10 years. But, you know, we as the People's Struggle Alliance, who one fraction of it is a breakaway group from the JVP, was very much critical of those initial agreements and showed that, look, even according to the capitalist perspectives on debt sustainability put out by the World Bank and other global, these imperialist institutions, countries in the third world will be categorized as highly indebted if their GDP, debt to GDP ratio is above 50%. So how, I mean, it's a clear distortion of all these accepted norms by the IMF when it comes out and says, look, after 10 years, you'll be fine if you reach 95% debt ratio. So what it does is that it completely takes away the bargaining power of the government to go and ask for a higher haircut on the ISBs. So which means that the IMF was clearly playing the role of a lapdog of the creditors. So later on, these criticisms made their way into the NPP, you know, their electoral propaganda. So some of the fractions absorbed that. Then there are many instances like that, numerous instances. Most of their progressive proposals actually came out like that, especially when it comes to the economic situation. But right now, what we are seeing, even those fractions which were earlier leaning towards the progressive politics is now recoiling or backtracking on their earlier positions and trying to be more establishment friendly. So so it is very unclear how things would span out in the next, maybe, I don't know, following the election. It's very unclear how things would span out. But I think what they are expecting is that because there is a grace period of around 5 years where the capital portion does not have to be repaid, at least during that period, they would have a stable foreign exchange position, and therefore nothing turbulent would happen on the domestic front. So, and also there was clear pressure by the business elite, because the following day after the elections, the Chamber of Commerce of Sri Lanka issued a statement demanding the government that it should abide by the current IMF program and it should expedite the deal with the ISB holders, which is signed by Wickremesinghe. And so this was reiterated by these lobby groups, especially representing the corrupt business elite of the country. So now they are capitulating to their demands, and it appears to be that the NPP is more rather in line with those regressive policies where the public would not, at the expense of the public, on that hand. And also, if you look at the on the side of the national question, we see that there is a clear like sort of symbolism they play around with, sort of giving out a latent message to the Sinhala Buddhist masses that they are it's the Sinhala Buddhist government that has come into power, and that they are ready to represent their interest over other minorities at any given moment. There are certain, rituals and various religious places which these leaders, the president, the prime minister, uh, went and visited, giving out that symbolism to the masses while excluding certain others. And the particular the fact that the presidential statements only came out in Sinhala, and that emphasizing their allegiance, so to speak, to the Sinhala Buddhist majority. So on both fronts, even on the national question and on the political economic side of things are not looking so much different from where they were. But also, on the other hand, there seems to be sort of giving handouts to the peasantry. Now they have increased the they call the fertilizer subsidy by about let's say about 70 to 60% from where it was 15,000 to 25,000 rupees, and they have given a subsidy to the fishermen on their kerosene purchases, and also now people are expecting a massive reduction on the price of gas or petroleum, petrol. So these things could be expected because parliamentary election is around the corner. So some of just so that because they would also try hard to get the majority in the parliament, because in the presidential election they got a significant vote. I shouldn't undermine that. 42.5% of the entire vote went into the NPP. But in order to secure the majority, that is not enough in the parliament. So yeah, so we expect during the next 2 months that there will be some handouts given to the masses that are really put down by the economic crisis or the ongoing economic stagnation that Sri Lanka is facing. Thank you. Thanks a lot for your time. If there is any questions, please raise. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Comrade Arusha. That's a really clear, scintillating analysis, particularly of the economic situation and the meaning of the IMF deal. Before I throw it open to discussion, Danusha, do you have any information about whether Swastika is going to join us?
Comrade Roger, can I quickly? I actually dropped her a message.
You're muted.
Can I quickly? Yeah.
Yes.
Get
yes,
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Meanwhile, any questions from comrades or any points of discussion? Please indicate. We have more comrades here from India, and at least one more, I think, from Sri Lanka. Any of you comrades? Ujita, please, yes, come in. You're muted, comrade. You need
Okay,
to.
right, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
In my case, only faintly, but
Can you hear me okay
on.
now? Hear me okay now?
Yep. Carry on.
Yeah, just a question. I mean, obviously the MPP, the new president and his allies in the coalition, they have decided to embark on the parliamentary road of reform, and and supposedly radical change through those means. Given that they didn't, the AKD, the new president, didn't get over 50% even of the vote, and the fact that they have only 3 members of parliament at the moment, the kind of compromises that were described is true, but given the reality that they have embarked on this parliamentary road of reform, and given that Sri Lanka is a small country with, doesn't have the kind of clout that, for instance, India has, what do you really expect? I mean, I would have thought, the realistic, pragmatic thing is to consolidate power in the best possible manner, at least until you get a kind of possibly a 2/3, at least a majority, if not a 2/3 majority in parliament. So some of the compromises that have been described, is true, but unless you're offering revolution as an alternative, which they have rejected, they have embarked on twice. There was a insurrectionary uprising, 2 different types of insurrection. I accept. What do you expect them to do? Given the confines of the realities, economic and political realities, that they are faced with.
Shall I go ahead, Comrade?
Yeah, carry on.
May I know Comrade's name, please? Thanks a lot for raising that.
My name?
Ujita.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Ujita, my name is Ujita Dissanayake. I'm of Sri Lankan origin.
Okay, great to know. So, Comrade Ujita, now the thing is, there is enough scope for the whatever government made, could be NPP or whatever people's government, oriented towards achieving well-being of the people in general, not any sort of revolutionary change per se, that there's enough scope even within the current global imperialistic order to come up with a better negotiation strategy, a better, so to speak, come up with an analysis to go into the negotiation table with the IMF and the creditors to convince the fact that the current deal is an absolute draconian deal which would seal the fate of the country for the next 15 to 20 years in a way that it will completely drag down the living standards and also enable the transfer of surplus. Now, this is the issue. This is what the imperialists really are. Well, that is what they're targeting. On one hand, it will look like as if, okay, you are completely sacrificing the sovereignty of the country and the state in the area of foreign debt. Now, this is a new development, I should say. Earlier, we have sacrificed our sovereignty in all other aspects, like, let's say, land, sea, all that trade agreements. But this is very new. This is now we have already now about to destroy our sovereignty in the sphere of foreign debt or sovereign bonds. So now, take the example, for instance, the case of Ecuador, even Argentina, let's say even the case of Greece. And there are plenty of examples in the world. There are countries which are even more deprived than Sri Lanka, have come up with better deals, like Nigeria. That is because the governments had the need and the urgency to come up with such plans, and they were not complete 100% stooges or agents of the imperialist foreign financial capital powers. But in the case of Sri Lanka, it's abnormally they have colluded. The degree of collusion is absolutely abnormal, because on one hand, yes, we see that what I was trying to say was that on one hand, you see with this deal, the surplus has been transferred in the form of debt repayments. The debt repayments will be much more greater than what we were supposed to pay at the point of bankruptcy. This is how remarkable this deal is. And your interest rates are about to shoot up to 9.75%, right? For a debt that you borrowed 10 years ago. And if we reach a GDP somewhere around 107 billion, an average GDP, because that in dollar terms that is very achievable, because our debt repayments for the next 4 or 5 years will be low, only interest payments will be there. If the current administration also continues the vehicle import ban, which could be, which is quite likely, it is highly likely that our currency will remain stable. As a result, the dollar value of the GDP will shoot up tremendously, 10 to 15%. That's what we've seen happening for the last 2 years. So the targets the creditors have issued is very much achievable. And when those targets are reached, but I mean the GDP, our interest rates pick up or increase. These are called macro-linked bonds. So so when that happens, our interest rates go up. And then again, after 5 years, it is quite definite that Sri Lanka will be in another even bigger debt crisis. Now that is good for the imperialist powers, because that will depress our currency. That's now, if you look at the currencies of the third world, they're all depreciating. What happens there is that it is easy for the capitalist centers, say in the West and elsewhere, to reap the labor surplus and other. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Comrade Dhanraj. It's your answers are really enlightening, but I thought there are a couple of comrades who want to come into the discussion, but more important also, Comrade Swastika has joined us now. If you wouldn't mind, if you want to just finish off the point you're making.
Yeah, just to finish off, thanks a lot, Comrade. Just to finish off, so we have been tied into a time bomb of debt, foreign debt, where this will again explode in about 5 to 6 years, which will enable the foreign capitalists, the imperialists, to buy or purchase or acquire the output of labor at depressed prices. That's what happens when the exchange rates collapse. So it is not just benefiting the debt holders or the ISB holders, it is benefiting capital, the predatory capital imperialist system in general. So it must be renegotiated. And there's so much of information we have fed them. There's so much of analysis that can be brought into the negotiation table so that a better deal can be agreed upon. If you're not willing to, completely kick out the IMF and do your own way, even within that framework also, there's plenty of scope to renegotiate a better deal. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Comrade Dhanraj. Can I ask Steve and Ian if you wouldn't mind holding back your contributions or questions until Swastika has given her contribution? Is that okay, comrades? Okay, thank you. Swastika, a warm welcome to you. I know you're in the midst of big class battles, and I'm sure we are really grateful to you for sparing the time to come to us. Over to you, please, comrade.
Always good to be back, Comrade. Always good to be back. I'll just maybe say some initial thoughts on the elections, particularly in terms of the interest of the working class and what this election means. Of course, I mean, this in a sense has been a kind of a historical election for us, because it has helped us break from the traditional ruling elite, if I may put it that way. We have been ruled since independence. We have been ruled by families, the Bandaranayakas, the Rajapaksas. So we have been ruled by this certain class of elites since independence. And Anura Kumara Dissanayake was not part of that ruling elite. So in a sense, his victory kind of marks a break from that kind of class politics or that kind of elite politics which we had in Sri Lanka. But what is interesting is that, yes, what is interesting is that the international media has been, has been framing Anura Kumara Dissanayake as a Marxist. And we see all these international articles saying the Marxists has won election. But on the ground, the National People's Power, the NPP, which is the new face of the JVP, they've always tried to remove that Marxist or self-proclaimed Marxist history of theirs. So they've always tried to clean themselves of this we are left image, and they have always portrayed themselves as this center party, not even center left, I would say, but center party, forming close ties with the business class, by and large the business class, and their majority voter base is of course the middle class, but forming close ties with the business class to appear quote unquote not radical. So that is what's happening on the ground. But the international media, of course, portrays himself or portrays Anura Kumara Dissanayake as a Marxist who has come to power. So it's a bit confusing for us on the ground because he's not a Marxist. None of his politics are has anything, like, it does not even have the semblance of class consciousness in it. It's about attracting middle class votes. It's about gaining the support of the business community, which has traditionally opposed JVP, and so on. So while people like me, who also put forward a presidential candidate and contested, while people like me, we welcome that breakaway from the traditional ruling elite and so on. Of course, we welcome that break because that is a good thing for Sri Lankan politics. We are also not enthusiastic about the politics which the NPP has proposed while they came to power and how they came to power. So that's one thing. That's one specific thing. And very recently, when we were analyzing the electoral map of the NPP, it is also by and large a Sinhala vote which got the NPP to power. If you look at the electoral map, the northeast of the country, which has the Tamil minority population of the country and the Muslim population of the country, then of course the plantation or the upcountry of the hill country of the hill central province of the country, which has the plantation workers, the Malaya Tamil communities, and so on. So basically the minorities, areas where there is concentration of minorities, Anura Kumara Dissanayake did not win. In fact, his opposing candidate won in these regions. So that is also an indication of how on what a roadmap of, or an electoral map of how different ethnicities voted in these elections. So that is another point which I want to mark in terms of the new government which has come into power. They did get substantial, or they did get a increased amount of vote from the areas where there is a concentration of minority populations when we compare to 2019 election. But they still did not win in these areas. They by and large won from a southern Sinhala vote bank, I would say. So that is also another interesting aspect of these elections. And the third interesting aspect, which I always found it to be the politics of the NPP, this is one of my primary critiques, is that I feel that they use the working class vote base, just like a capitalist, like a traditional capitalist party. They campaign with the working class to get middle class politics to power, or to get the elite politics to power. And that has been my critique of all the capitalists. That is how capitalist parties do politics. They get the vote of the working class in order to put certain interests to power and so on. So that has been my critique of the NPP also, that they use the working class vote to get certain points in the middle class politics to power. And that has been my critique of the NPP. And I don't think this election has changed my mind on how they have perceived the voter base, or how they have approached the voter base and so on. So when they have a meeting in the free trade zones, for instance, they say one thing, but when they have a meeting with the business community, they say something else. So this also we observed right throughout the electoral process. So that is why I always keep questioning how the international media portrays Anura Kumara Dissanayake as a Marxist president, when within the country he has not been doing class politics as such for him to be called a Marxist. So that's also another interesting aspect of this election which I want to park. And the fourth interesting aspect is the fact that, as Danusha was saying, they have not really challenged the IMF. In fact, they have only said that they would negotiate with, they have not even used the word renegotiate. They have only said, or actually relook at what the IMF has been doing in terms of conditionalities, in terms of how they are negotiating the debt for us. So even yesterday, it looks as if the NPP is going to go ahead with what was negotiated by the previous president in terms of debt negotiation. So that negotiated deal is terrible for the people of this country. It's going to be catastrophic for the ordinary people of this country, because the entire burden of the debt is going to fall on the working people. So if the NPP is going to go ahead with the negotiated deal of the previous government, then what they're saying is that the burden of that debt negotiation, or the burden of that renegotiated debt, is going to fall on the working people of the country. So that also we are observing, and of course, we are not saying anything. We are not, because the wave is still with the NPP. People are very excited about the NPP. They're doing a few things, like, for instance, just one day after he came to power, Anura Kumara Dissanayake asked the old staff of the previous president to return their vehicles. Then they came and parked their vehicles in Golfes Green, and then it became a spectacle. So there are many spectacles which are happening when it comes to the NPP on the ground, and I think people are distracted by these spectacles. But that is the wave right now. So whatever we say, it's not being taken. For instance, we're warning about how the debt negotiation process is going. People are not listening. We're warning about the fact that NPP has a history of Sinhala Buddhist majoritarian ideology. People are not listening. But we want to park all of these concerns. So when the politics does turn, when the people do realize that, maybe NPP is not that progressive, radical turn from the old politics as they thought they were, then we would be in a position to speak to people about why we had concerns with the NPP in the first place. So it's always good to park that politics and or to raise those concerns even now and keep it for a future date. Now is not the time, because people are enamored by this new president. So this wave is still going with the NPP, but we say these things so that we park those opinions, so that for a future date we can use them. So that's the fourth thing which I wanted to highlight. And the fifth thing, of course, is that parliament elections are coming in November, early November. So NPP is also, like how the previous government did, NPP is also doing many popular things. For instance, they have appointed a female prime minister, or they have appointed a female person as a woman as a prime minister. And that is, I would say, a significant step. Whether they did it for elections or not is another question, but it's a significant step in terms of Sri Lankan politics and Sri Lankan left politics. Because within Sri Lankan left politics, women still have a huge, they have a huge uphill task in terms of getting their place in Sri Lankan left politics, and women are still struggling for it. So when a woman gets appointed, whether it was done for electoral gains or not, it's still a significant political move by the NPP government. And I, of course, really welcomed the move that they have appointed Dr. Harini Amarasuriya as the prime minister of the country. Of course, she's the interim prime minister, but still, I would think it's a significant move when it comes to that party, but also when it comes to Sri Lankan politics. Then, of course, they're doing various popular things, like, appointing persons who have a clean record, anti-corrupt or uncorrupted record when it comes to certain political positions, like governors in the country. So they're appointing people who don't have this past baggage of corruption with them. So all of this is happening, which looks like good things, or which looks like, these political events which are happening in this country. But whether this would be sustained, and whether this would remain post-parliament election, or whether they're just doing this to gain votes from the middle class during the parliament election, is something which we have to wait and see after November. So we're all waiting for that. My party is also contesting for the parliament election. we want a strong opposition. We want a left opposition in parliament. So we are hoping that some of our members will also go to parliament, but it's very hard because the wave is still with the NPP. But of course, our politics is not, parliament elections is only part of our politics. Our politics is always with the struggle, it's always with the workers. We are very concerned about, Danusha spoke about how workers are, or the wages, or the wages of the workers are going to become really cheap for international capital to exploit. That is still very much a concern for us, because next year labor law reforms are going to, if they follow the IMF trajectory, labor law reforms are going to come, privatization is going to come, debt negotiation, I mentioned this before, that is going to come. So many things which the IMF already did with the previous government is going to come next year. So there needs to be a voice on the ground fighting against these conditionalities on behalf of the people. And I hope, I mean, we are always on the ground. So that would be us, no doubt. Thank you, Raja. If any questions, I'm looking forward to answering them. Thank you, Raja.
Well, thank you very much, Swastika. I must apologize. I think I had a unstable connection and I missed a few, probably 3 minutes of your contribution. What I heard was great. Anyway, well worth it. I think it might be better if I ask Pam to take over the chair in case I have another mishap like that. Is that okay with you, Pam?
Yeah, I got that, Roger. Okay.
Okay. Well, over to you then, Pam.
Oh, you want me to start now? Right. Okay. Just a sec while I get on. Okay. So, right. So I think Steve's next.
Yeah, thanks for your report, Swatika. Maybe you can several things. Why don't you talk about the role of the unions? You say that this government is going to institute privatization, continue the policies of capitalism and imperialism. What is the role of the unions in relationship to their policies? And also the left parties, the other left parties that ran in the election, what was their program in relationship to this party? And third, what is the role? What have the Chinese been doing in relationship to this election and the debt that Sri Lanka owes to them? And also the situation with the Palestinians and the United States, U.S. imperialism. What is the position of the new government to that, and the relationship of Sri Lanka to the genocide in Gaza and Palestine and now Lebanon? Thanks.
So that's a direct question. Do you want to answer it, Swastika, before we bring Ian in? Would you mind, Ian?
Yes. So the first question on privatization and what unions are doing. I first have to explain about the situation of unions in Sri Lanka. So in the government sector, which is where the privatization is going to hit very strongly, in the government sector, we have a relatively strong union base. But I would not say that the union base is a radical union base fighting for the rights of all working class and so on. In my opinion, they have been quite self-serving, coming in only when it comes to wages, salaries, and so on. So even the anti-privatization struggle in, for instance, the Ceylon Electricity Board, when IMF is pushing to privatize the Ceylon Electricity Board, the struggle with the unions were very weak. They were going and meeting politicians, trying to negotiate and so on. But here the IMF is coming like a big wave, and then the struggle of the unions was, almost non-existent, I would say. I mean, there was strikes here and there, but it was very weak. So what I think the unions will do, the public sector unions, not the private sector. Private sector unions are waging various other struggles. Like, for instance, they, under the IMF conditionality, they restructured the pension funds. Only in Sri Lanka this has happened. So we are waging other different struggles. But from the public sector unions, the privatization struggle, I do not see it, swelling up under this government. Rather, I think what they would try to do is they would try and negotiate or try to put pressure on the new government to not privatize institutions. For unions to go on the streets and take up a massive campaign against privatization, it would take a lot of time. I think there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of political divisions inside unions. But I think it'll take some time for the unions to go on the streets and put forward an effective effective resistance, effective political resistance or street resistance against what the new government is going to do, unless, of course, the unions attached to the major political parties, like for instance, the existing government which left, or the existing president who was unseated, his party also has a union. And there are similar political parties, traditional capitalist parties also have union bases with them. So unless they put forward a resistance to kind of, not really against privatization, but to disrupt the current government's, whatever the current government is doing for the sake of disrupting, unless that happens, I don't see the unions getting onto the streets and fighting against privatization anytime soon. It might happen maybe from 6 months' time and so on, unless, of course, the unions attached to the major political parties show their opposition to the new government by getting the workers to do a token strike or so on. So I don't see public sector unions, actually struggling for the common good of the people or the common good of workers anytime soon. But we have to wait and see. So that's in terms of unions in relation to, or public sector unions in relation to the new government. In terms of the other left political parties, myself and Danusha, we were part of a party called Alliance called the People's Struggle Alliance. And this People's Struggle Alliance was a combination of three left parties, the Frontline Socialist Party, the New Democratic Marxist-Leninist Party, which has its base in the minority regions of the country, and the Socialist People's Forum, which consists it's a small party which consists of trade union leaders, intellectuals, left thinkers, and so on. So these three parties got together with new faces which emerged from the aragalaya, the people's struggle. We formed an alliance. Of course, we got we got around 11,000 odd votes, so it was a negligible amount of votes. But the program we put forward was we need to exit from the current IMF agreement. We need to find a permanent solution. These are the main themes of our campaign. Of course, I mean, we put forward a political program, like quite a detailed political program, but the main slogans were: one, we need to exit out of this current IMF agreement because it's detrimental to the people. We need to stop negotiating with the debtors the way we are currently, creditors with the way we are currently negotiating. And instead, we have to form a third world alliance with other states which are negotiating with the creditors and put forward a common demand to renegotiate our debt, which would put us in a much stronger position than what we are in right now. That's in terms of debt negotiation, which we have already started doing with other trade unions and so on, other trade unions and organizations and so on. And in terms of the ethnic question, the national question, which has been plaguing our country, which has been dividing the working class since independence, we said, if we want to build a united working class, we need to come up with a solid solution to the national question. And then we put forward our solution to the national question, which is plaguing Sri Lanka, because otherwise we won't be able to build a united working class. And of course, we took a position against the very obvious encroachment of India and the United States into the politics of Sri Lanka. The India, of course, physically it's present. They are taking over lands in the north and the east. I mean, you can see it being physically present on the ground. The United States, of course, is intervening through the IMF by structurally changing the political and economic landscape of Sri Lanka. For instance, the IMF is proposing something called the governance diagnostic, where they have proposed that our central bank must be independent. But what they mean by independent is that the central bank must be independent from being accountable to the people, but working in favor of finance, capital, and so on. So these are the main kind of political slogans we took. And of course, we took up issues which directly impact people. For instance, the taxation, indirect taxation, which were affecting people, the electricity issue, which has directly affected people, and so on. So this was our campaign, but obviously, like people were voting for one of the two main candidates whom they thought was going to win the election. So we did not gain traction in terms of vote, but we gained traction in terms of audience, where people were coming and listening to our, people were receptive to what we were saying, and they were becoming more critical of the new president or new party which is coming to power. In terms of our relationship with the left party, the position which we have taken is that if they put forward a people friendly agenda. For instance, if they're going to reduce taxation, particularly indirect taxation, so that the ordinary people, the food costs would go down and so on, then obviously we would support that. If they're going to completely reverse the central bank act which has passed, which is making the central bank unaccountable to the people, of course we would support that. But if they're going to go ahead with the current debt negotiated by the previous president, if they're going to pass, for instance, the anti-terror legislation which was proposed by the previous government, if they're going to pass, for instance, if they're going to keep the pension restructuring as it is, and if they're going to pass, for instance, I don't know if they're going to go, as I said, if they're going to go ahead with the current negotiated debt program of the government, then of course we have to oppose it, and we would oppose it on the ground as we have always done. So we are leaving that space for the new government to take the side of the working people, which they should be doing, because the problem with all of these governments were they were completely serving the interests of a particular very, very minority bourgeoisie class in Sri Lanka. So we're waiting for the government to take a progressive position towards the people, because the people voted for them, even though it was not a majority. But if they don't do that, then of course we are going to, as we are doing now, we are going to be taking a strong position against the government if they're not going to be working and negotiating on behalf of the people. So that's a position which we have taken in terms of relationship to the party. In terms of the new government's relationship to Gaza and the genocide which is happening in Gaza, it's very interesting, because the NPP we have a Sri Lankan Palestinian Solidarity Group, in which some of the central committee members of the JVP, the Janata Vimukti Peramuna, which is the main, or the only party in the National People's Party, the constituent party in the NPP. So some of the main members were part of this Sri Lankan Palestinian Solidarity Group. But throughout the election campaign, we did not see, I mean, we took up a pro-Palestinian stand. Like, we took a very, very strong pro-Palestine stand on behalf of the Palestinian people, completely opposed the genocide and so on. But I didn't see the NPP doing that, interestingly. I didn't see them taking a position on the United States aggression against United States support to Israel with regards to the genocide on Palestine. So I did not see their main members. I mean, of course, some of the supporters put out posts and so on, but I did not see the party itself taking a strong position, despite the fact that they are part of the Sri Lankan Palestinian, Palestinian Solidarity Group or something like that. So I did not see the party taking an official stand on the genocide which is happening in Palestine right now. So that's on the Palestinian question. In terms of China, when the previous government, I think it's called the Official Committee of Creditors, Ranil Wickremesinghe, the previous president, just before the election, he got into a negotiated deal with the Official Committee of Creditors, which also includes the China Exim Bank. So they got into a negotiated agreement on how this debt is going to be restructured. And what we are told, we have not seen in documents, but what we are told is that 4.5% of the GDP is going to be allocated for debt servicing. In very summary, that was the negotiated agreement. So China is also part of this negotiated agreement. So whether this new government will now, when they try to renegotiate, will they now start talking to bilateral creditors individually, which I think would be favorable to us? Or if they are now, what they have indicated is that they're going to go ahead with this negotiated deal of the previous government. Then, of course, I mean, it's not China or India, it's just that the agreement, they're going ahead with the agreement and so on. So the new government has not shown on which side they are going to tilt towards, whether they're going to tilt towards China or India, or whether they're going to, move closer to the US. We don't really know. It's too early to tell as well. But one thing we do know is China was part of this this negotiated agreement, or this informal negotiated agreement, which was entered into by the previous government. And this government has said that they are going to go ahead with that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Swastika. Ian next. Sorry to keep you waiting, Ian. If anybody else wants to speak or ask any questions, could you put your hand up, please? Go on, Ian.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a whole barrage of questions too, but I'll just start with a quick observation that already when this new government, new president was elected, I was thinking, it seemed to very much remind me of Greece a few years ago with the election of Syriza. I'm thinking that even more after the first discussion between our first speaker and first contribution from the floor on what they could do between revolution and what they seem to be doing so far, which isn't very much, and that there is quite a lot of wiggle room between that. I think it's the first time I've heard the government of Nigeria praised at a WIN meeting, but I think that's positive to see from some of the most right-wing, certainly capitalist examples, just like we could with Cyprus, where this new supposedly left government could and should be doing more, and the others possibly under less pressure because their class loyalties are even more assured, have done more. So yeah, I'm wondering if it will go the same way. Obviously, it's not the complication of being in the single currency, but certainly it seems that these radical or seemingly radical governments come to power at a time when there's a particular economic problem going on, the IMF deal being like what happened with the Troika in Greece, and then it's booby-trapped for them. And meanwhile trimming their sails already to get in and so on. So yeah, is it likely to go the same way as Greece? Are people thinking of the lessons of Greece, I suppose, would be one of my questions. But also on the national issue, like first of all, that Sri Lankan comrades might want to explain if I've got this right, that it seems very odd from an outsider to have such a chauvinist majoritarian line and call yourself a Marxist party. But I think there's some history there where in the 50s and 60s and even in the left reformist government of the 70s, it was the Sinhala majority that were poorer on average than the Tamils. The British had played divide and rule and somewhat favoured the Tamils. And there was a bending of the stick backwards, then became very damaging, that the previous left reformist party that now seems to be in total chaos, that Rajapaksa's far right came out of, was founded as a majoritarian party from the start, but also more third worldist, more social democratic. And that it was the right, not always, not in the 80s when the real war started, but certainly in the previous premiership under Wickremesinghe is just gone, that was seen as more friendly to making a deal with the Tamils, and that the JVP accused of being pro-separatist even then, and that was part of how it got rehabilitated into the mainstream of politics after its two insurrections. So I don't know if there's any chance of movement on that. I read recently there was a 1987 constitutional amendment that's never been implemented, and that the JVP condemned at the time, and presumably since, for devolution, some form of autonomy in the Tamil areas, which seems like the least that should be, if not complete federalization, like the very fitting and conventionally Marxist approach to the minority issue in Sri Lanka. But I see that, as Swastika said, that although the vote for the JVP went up in these areas, they had not to go up nationally. It was 3% last time. They won this time. And so, of course, it went up everywhere, but it was actually the candidates of the right that won in the Tamil and minority areas. Sorry, someone's calling me. I don't know if you can hear my ringtone. Is that all right? I'll just keep going for now and check out the call later. Yeah, and that I think I saw the JVP even knocking the minority areas that change is coming. You don't want to be on the wrong side of it. So these things could obviously be quite damaging. I do wonder about the NPP. I don't know if Swastika just said the JVP was the only actual political party in it. I thought it was a coalition. Whether it's a coalition of parties or just with other social forces, I'd be interested who else is involved in it. If there's anyone from the old strong historical Trotskyist tradition in Sri Lanka in the NPP, if there's any more Tamil representation than it seems within the JVP itself, which seems to be almost a purely Sinhala organization, or is that indeed wrong? Do they have Tamil branches? Or is there more Tamil regional parties within the NPP? Also in terms of geopolitics, I think Swastika was saying it's too early to tell whether it'll lean towards China or the US. I was wondering if all the talk of a Marxist president was because this is a result the US doesn't really like, and that like when the radical right wing in the States called Obama a socialist years ago, and then it in some ways led to Bernie Sanders by making that whole term more led to more discussion of that term. If it could lead to more discussion of other Marxist options in the coming period, I could see a lot of questions. I'm glad the Palestine one's already been asked, but the thing about China, it's just round the corner from the South China Sea with the new Cold War being ratcheted up there. If there's any idea of where the new government will stand on that. And one last thing, I did see that the new president met somebody, I think in the Christian leadership, about the Easter Sunday bombings that British television produced a documentary about a year and a bit ago on the Rajapaksas possibly being implicated in letting ISIS do it to come back into power on a security platform. So if that's any kind of positive indication that there'll be justice for that, and that the government won't entirely lean far right on communal and national issues, and indeed that the far right of the Rajapaksas has been smashed. It went down to 3%, or if a lot of that base is now behind the JVP and things won't really change. So where do you think things stand on that? Thanks.
Okay, thanks. We move on to Saranapala. I'd particularly like to hear from any of the other Indian or Sri Lankan comrades. If you've got any questions, or you can throw any insight into what's going on. Saranapala, would you like to go next?
Thank you, ma'am. I think Comrade Swastika explained in the broad situation the beginning of the election, and I think I also like to make a few points. The comrade who spoke earlier, that he mentioned some 1970 coalition, Bush coalitions, and the incidents came ahead. I think I like to make few points about the JVP tactic and how it comes as a reformist party, the large party as a reformist program. So you know that the theme of the program, rich country and fair life. So it is the name also includes also it's I think it is loose, no any firm the program. And the 60s, the JVP started 60s, and 71 they started the armed struggle and also failed. And again they came for the mainstream politics in 1977 with the help of Jaya Javadana. And they supported Jaya Javadana to maintain the country and also to suppress the working class. Especially the JVP was as an organization, they supported to JR to I think Comrade Roja knows the history. So they the first days they support the traditional workers, strength of the workers in Sri Lanka, because they mainly made a critique against the trade union leaders, and some of the leaders they killed in 1987 and 86 and 87. So they smashed the working class. JR, one side JR had done, but JVP also had done another way. So therefore, that they tried to pretend that they are the new leadership in Sri Lanka. It is the new left. They tried to show that the working class and others new left, but they are trying to make some tactics using coalition politics, because they 1994 they supported to Chandrika to come power. And again, 2005, they supported to Rajapaksa. And again, that they supported to Fonseca. And again, they supported to Maitripala Sirisena. So they supported them. They show that they are willing to ignore the socialist policies and socialist struggle. And they made collaborate. They collaborated with the bourgeoisie always. Past periods, I think, after 1977, they were with the bourgeois politics and bourgeois parties. They were working, and this time. So the comrades asked that some questions. I think that what was the NPPE? Actually, NPP is very clearly it is JVP. And there was no any civil organization or very significant organization with them in PPE, NPP. So they have what lot of rich people gathered in the NPP. So some of the leaders, some of bourgeois leaders said that there is no point the Marxism and Leninism. Now this is the new era. New era means, that the neoliberal era. So they announced it publicly, and but JVP did not talk about it. JVP accepted the things what the bourgeois people said. So therefore now, however, it is when we the last presidential election, he got only 4 lakhs. But it is as according to my opinion, it is an unprecedented victory in Sri Lanka for the bourgeoisie. And also now it is still he is having some carnival, that without going without security, without having festivals and everything. Now he is going to show some I am not destroy the national properties and national money or something like that. But the thing is, it will come to problem, because they promised in the election 54,000 minimum age for the working class. They accepted. Now I think it will come forward near future, maybe 4 6 months, as Comrade Swastika explained. The 6 months it will come up, and then first the working class should come forward. But we don't think that they also have some quantity of workers behind the NPPE. But I think they also do not tolerate the living conditions. Let's see, and wait and see, as it may be a good development for the working class in Sri Lanka. And also one of our comrade asked what is the Trotskyist movement. Now the Trotskyist, all LSSP destroyed Trotskyism, and also NSSP also destroyed the Trotskyism. Now it is a very big task for the new left to talk about the Trotskyism and put a foundation, especially based on working class. It is a task of the task of us. I think we think that the People's Social Forum is trying to and fighting for that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah and Paula. Roy, would you like to go next?
All right. Thanks to the comrades for the input on what's happening in Sri Lanka. I have a couple of issues, and I don't know, and I apologize. I've also had unstable connection, so I apologize if it's already been covered. But talking of genocide and the Tamil genocide of 2009, I think if we get a little more detail on that, what's happening in the Tamil areas, the land occupation by the military, which I suspect is still a very strong force in Sri Lanka. So you've got the Tamil issue, you've got the military, we have the plantation workers. What is their position now? And the Buddhist regime as well. We've always in South Africa have tended to think of Sri Lanka as a Sinhalese Buddhist regime, mainly because of the dominance or the dominant role played by the Buddhist monks. I saw on TV the new president almost prostrating himself before the Buddhist monks who were seated in the front row. So perhaps a little more detail for us to see if there is any progress on the social front in terms of a possible change, if not necessarily a social revolution, but at least a change in Sri Lanka on these issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. Moving on to John or Dominic.
Yeah, it's Dominic. It's just a couple of things I wanted to raise. One, I think the first comrade who spoke was talking about that the incoming president and party had no option but to compromise. If that's the situation a few weeks after the election, why didn't they put that position forward before the election? Because just thinking as when I was active in a trade union, there's no way you'd go and meet the employer and say, well, basically, we agree whatever you want to do. You think, well, what's the point of the union? What's the point of the position? And there's always something to do. And the first thing they should be doing is, or comrades outside that party should be doing, and comrades who are maybe possibly even within it, is saying that the minimum position we've got is what we said at the start, no compromise with the capitalists on this. I think the thing is, a point I would raise, I don't know that it'd go down in Sri Lanka, is that if a capitalist firm goes bankrupt, the debtors are totally allowed. The debt is not paid back in terms of 80, 90, 100%. It's paid back in terms of 5, 10, 15%. And that's how the capitalist system treats capitalist firms that go bankrupt. But when it comes to countries, it's not the capitalists in those countries who benefit from the debt, from the loans, who pay the money back. It's the workers. It's just class war in action. And I think, to raise the point that we shouldn't be paying these people back. They invested money taking a risk. That risk didn't work out. Hard luck to them. Not that we're there to compromise and pay them back whatever they want from us and leave ourselves open to exploitation in the future. And I think the point is that compromise isn't necessary to build up a base. Compromise loses your base. The way you build up a base is by standing out and fighting in the interests of the working class and not sort of compromising with the capitalists about how to further exploit them. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Dominic. Anybody else? Because if not, I think there's been a lot of questions asked, and I know there's been some some responses in the chat, but if there are no further questions, perhaps we need to allow the speakers to come back. Danusha, where's Danusha? Danusha, did you want to actually respond? I was thinking of perhaps you followed by Swastika. Do you want to come back and make some responses or make some closing remarks?
Hi. Yeah, about the point which the last comrade made about about compromising on the position, let's say, of a progressive plan in terms of this debt repayment. Well, if we look at the rhetoric, the political propaganda which the NPP carried through, it had, well, in any case, it had two main, in terms of the political economy, it had two main areas, I should say. One, how does the NPP relates with the imperialist network, or the relationship which the center of capitalist system, how that relates with the third world, or specifically with Sri Lanka. So that, of course, then concretely we are speaking about the discussions with the IMF and the creditors. And the other aspect of their propaganda was how the domestic elite and the political establishment was robbing the public, or extracting the surplus through the government machinery, rather than capital accumulation per se. There is some sort of wealth accumulation going on through rent-seeking behavior in the government sector. That is both the political and the business establishment elite is working hand in hand to achieve their own ends. They were much more critical of this particular aspect of the domestic government rent-seeking behavior, corruption, and so on, rather than so much about the global imperialist order. And they had absolutely nothing to say about, I think, the comrade previously, the comrade who spoke previously was asking about the situation about the national question and how ethnic relations will progress under an NPP government. So on that question, and also about the question of how capital works internationally and also both locally, they were trying to create this self-image that they are very much business friendly, but not friendly with the corrupt business elite. The problem is with mainly the rent-seeking behavior of the government and certain business elements in the corporate sector. And they were very much less critical of this IMF program. And as I said earlier, there were conflicting views coming out from the NPP. One parties who were, I should say, who were very much closer to the corporate spectrum was very much keen to go ahead with the IMF parameters and try to work something out within those parameters to, so to speak, give some concessions to the public. And there are other factions who are a bit more critical, I should say, as I said earlier, as the People's Struggle Alliance. We were actually I'm not trying to exaggerate or anything. This is very much in their manifesto also. I should say more than 90% of the progressive things, at least a semblance of progressiveness in their proposals, if there are any such proposals, at least 90% of that came through the criticism which was waged by the PSA, or the People's Struggle Alliance, and earlier the trade union movement. So those ideas are much more mobilized. Well, it got traction in the public, and so they could not leave behind that criticism, and they couldn't play a blind eye to that. So they had to absorb that at least during that initial stage of their, or at least running up to the election. So now that they have assumed power, I mean, they've taken hold of the presidency, now they're trying to, I think they have now, because as soon as they assumed presidency, we saw the especially the economic elite, the commercial elite trying to capture the state, issuing statements, demands, saying that you must go ahead with the IMF, especially the Chamber of Commerce, which is the mouthpiece of Sri Lanka's corporate elite. On the same day, I think, or the next day, they put out a strong statement demanding the new president to go ahead with that was their first demand. They had a list of 7 or 8 demands, all very regressive, all trying to expand their own interests. They were pushed down the throat of the NPP government or the presidency. So yes, and about the ethnic issue, as I also said earlier, I mean, they have completely represented the interest of the Sinhala Buddhists by all means. And even by going to the northern east, they, I mean, audaciously throwing up these very threatening remarks about the result of the previous presidential election, sort of threatening the northern east people. If you don't stand with the NPP, now that there is a wave towards the NPP, especially by the Sinhala Buddhist South, the Sinhala Buddhist South will not take that lightly. And this is the type of message which Anura Kumara Dissanayake had to make to the northern east people. And northern east people delivered a clear message. He didn't win, I think, more than 10 to 15% of the vote, very much less. So, so he was clearly rejected, and his divisive, this racist sentiments were clearly rejected by the northern east people. And even now, after assuming power, what we see is that this type of symbolism being promoted that sort of entertains the Sinhala Buddhist mindset. And it also gives out a message that the government is at any given time ready to represent their interests at the expense of the minorities. They are, in the sense, Sinhala Buddhists. For instance, going and visiting this Dalada Maliga, which is one of the main religious institutions symbolizing Sinhala Buddhist hegemony over the rest of the land. And we didn't see him visiting any other, I don't know, as far as I saw, that was what was telecasted. So these are type of symbolism which we saw. And I think there are other examples also. So we don't see a political solution for the ethnic question coming out from an NPP government whatsoever. Clearly against the 13th Amendment, which is also part of the power devolution framework, is completely rejected, which, as obviously I think we all agree, that it is the only way forward right now to solving the grievances of the non-Sinhalese community. So that is completely put under the carpet and just wiped away by the NPP, because I mean, in essence, what we see that even during their genesis in the mid 1960s, their leader, the view was that the Indian intervention is an imperialist intervention. It has been part of Sri Lanka's ancient history. So the minorities are also viewed in that light. That is the tragedy of this oppressed class movement. So it came as an attack towards the bourgeois left of the NSSP and the LSSP. So actually, the JVP was attacking the trade unions also, saying that they were in alliance with these bourgeois left-wing parties like the LSSP and the NSSP. So I mean, and you can see that the leadership was coming from the elite, background of those parties. So JVP came up as a party of actually the downtrodden masses, but it also represented the social underdevelopment that could not leave behind the racial sentiments that they had inherited from the past. That also got, well, so to speak, we can say, come up with a similar assessment of the LTT also. So, so all these forces are being played out right now.
Okay, thanks, Danusia. We're starting to run out of time now. So Roger's indicator. So if we can start keeping our comments sort of fairly concise, because I do want to bring Swastika in to finish off with the aim of finishing the meeting for 6 o'clock. So would you go next, Roger?
Yes, I'll be happy to, but I should just give a warning that every couple of minutes my connection seems to cut out. So that's another reason for me trying to be quick, to try and get my point in before I get cut off again. Comrades, there is massive struggles, as I mentioned earlier, throughout the subcontinent and throughout the so-called third world, and actually throughout the world. And I think we need to make one very simple point, but it's something which is sometimes overlooked. I welcomed what Swastika said about the proposal that the new government in Sri Lanka should try to make make a pact, if you like, or make a united front with other countries that are suffering under the clampdown, under the iron heel of the IMF, to try to strengthen their bargaining position. But I must say that seems to me, though a very very worthy aim, it seems to me that the bargaining position of even all of those countries put together would not be a very formidable weapon. And I think that we do need to go back to the very basic point that there is no solution under capitalism, and we have to put forward a socialist answer. And to do that, we need to make an alliance, not with the governments of the countries that are suffering, but with the working classes and with the working masses of those countries. Now, there is a struggle. As I've said before, we even look just at the countries of the subcontinent. There's the struggle in Sri Lanka, which already chased out one president, which has now elected a government which claims to be anti-capitalist and claims to be, in fact, in the past, to be revolutionary. You've had the uprising in Bangladesh, which has forced the prime minister to flee the country. You've had you had massive protests and demonstrations against the new military regime in Pakistan in support of their elected president. And in India, you've had massive protests. You had the farmers' protest, which lasted for several months, where they besieged the capital city, Delhi. Now, that was not a classic peasant uprising, or it was nothing to do with it was not an anti-feudal struggle, in other words. It was very explicitly and consciously an anti-capitalist struggle, because it was a protest by the farmers against a new law which would have forced them to sell their produce at prices dictated by the capitalist monopolies and only to sell to them. And it was for that reason, it didn't take the form of a land war or an anti-landlord struggle or anything of the kind. It became a massive siege of the capital city for months on end, literally paralyzed the capital. An absolutely incredible uprising. But during that time, and several times before and since, we've had general strikes of 25 crore, that's 250 million workers throughout the length and breadth of India. These are by far and away the biggest strikes ever in world history. So there is a real ally to the people of the suffering masses of Sri Lanka. The real ally is the masses who are looking for a way out and looking for a political voice and looking for a means of struggle, and who could really rise up together on a subcontinental scale, and perhaps far beyond that too, in a struggle to change the system and to overthrow the domination and the dictatorship of capital. So I mean, it's a simple point to make, but I thought that point needs to be raised in the discussion. I'd very much like to hear what Swastika would like to say in reply.
Okay, thanks, Roger. So if we come back to you,
I com-
Swastika, if you could just keep it, within the 15 minutes, if at all. I know it's a big ask because you've been asked so many questions, but where possible, if you can try and just sum up in 15 minutes, really appreciate that. Go ahead.
I think Dhanusha has answered most of the questions, and just wanted to say I completely agree with Roger. The Sri Lankan parties, the main three political parties, when they speak of India, they don't mean the working population. They mean the state interest of multinational like the Adanis and the Ambanis. So they don't really mean the working people, but that's a real opportunity for instance, people like us to forge ties with India in terms of class struggle and in terms of what workers are pushing for in India and so on. And I think Ian had texted and said this is the same thing which happened in Sri Lanka in terms of the farmers, but when it happens in India, it just sweeps over in terms of gender strikes and so on. So this is where we are also trying to form linkages, not only with the PSA, but all of us are part of unions. Dhanush and myself are we also part of a union. So this is where we are trying to form linkages, even for things like debt renegotiation and so on, where the governments are looking into negotiating individually with creditors and so on. They think that they're going to end the crisis by doing that, but we see it differently. We see it from the point of view of working people, where we can actually forge ties between other countries which are in debt distress and with people who are being imposed these austerities and the burden of debt even in other countries. So this is something which we have to learn from, but this is also something which we have to connect, which I think we also have been struggling in terms of how to sustainably connect with other movements in other countries, particularly with India and so on. So that's one thing. In terms of JVP's nationalist politics, I think comrades asked questions about that, and I think there was this question about whether there is a split inside the JVP, whether parts of the JVP have become, they have moved away from their nationalist, single nationalist origins and so on. I don't think so. I think the base is still very much singular majoritarian. Within the new phase of the JVP, there is a kind of a liberal attempt to portray the JVP as, not racist or not single nationalist. But what we saw during the elections is this nationalist face of the new party also coming out. When they get a critique from the South, saying that they are questioning the state and religion nexus, the Sinhala Buddhist state, or the Buddhist religion and the state, the nexus, and which has actually resulted in this 30-year-long conflict, which ended with a genocide. So when critique come from the South, the JVP is immediately willing to put on that Sinhala Buddhist cloak and show itself as this party of the majoritarian community. So I don't think there's a major shift in ideology, whether it be about the state or whether it be about the class interest. I don't think there's a major shift of class interest. Of course, initially JVP was waging what they would term as a struggle of the oppressed. I don't know whether it was you can term it as a class struggle, but it was definitely a struggle of the oppressed. But now they have come a long way and they want to completely remove themselves from the history. They have apologized several times to business meetings, where they have said that they are deeply sorry about the killings and so on. Of course, they have to apologize for the killings of ordinary civilians and so on. But the way they are doing it is like we are ashamed of our past kind of thing, which is which is problematic also. So I don't think definitely there is a shift from representing the oppressed, representing the marginalized. There's a shift from that for sure. But I don't see a big shift in terms of their nationalistic, single majoritarian nationalist politics, which of course now we don't see that, because now they are like good for everyone. They are good for everyone right now because there is a parliamentary election coming, but we have to see after the parliamentary election where they stand. Again, like, people are people put their hopes in elections. That's how people do politics, by and large, do politics in Sri Lanka. One of the comrades asked a question about unions and why unions are not taking a principal stand. This for the last, I don't know, since I have been active in union movements, this is what I have seen, where unions always try to take a shortcut. They don't want to do the hard work of mobilizing people on the ground. Private sector unions have a different problem altogether. Unions have been completely broken down. Less than 5% of the workers in the private sector actually unionized. So we have other struggles also. But the state sector, the unions are very comfortable with their salaries and their pay. So even when austerity is coming, till the last moment, their strategy is to negotiate with capitalist party, unfortunately. So that is the state of the Sri Lankan union movement. But we are trying to change. For instance, when the pension struggle was happening, we really tried to change that, and we tried to mobilize struggle on the ground. It's a long process, but we are trying to revive the union culture, revive the union culture which stood on the side of the working people and not just for salaries and perks and benefits and so on. We are trying to do that, but we are trying to reverse a 30-40 year long history where unions were slowly, gradually weakened, and then they were made arms of bourgeoisie parties. So it's a long process, but we are trying to challenge that system and change it also. So that's just on the union side. It's a new political, what I would like to say as a concluding terrain is or rather concluding remark, it's like a new political terrain which we're having right now in Sri Lanka, where a new party which has never been in power before has come to power, or a new president from a party which has never been in power has come to power. And it looks like in the parliamentary election also they would get, they might not get the 2/3 majority they need in parliament, but they would get enough to perhaps make a government maybe, or at least a minority government. So within that space, there are many areas which are loosening up. For instance, the nexus between, for instance, traditional capitalist class or traditional capitalist individuals and traditional capitalist parties. So those connections are kind of loosening up. And we as a party representing the working people, but not only as party, but as unions, as movements, we have to find those spaces in those loose connections and try to revive that spirit, that revolutionary spirit which people had in 2022. So I think that is the role of the left right now in Sri Lanka. That is what we are trying to do. Pam?
Thank you very much, Swastika. That's brilliant. Right, I think that's probably the end of the discussion for this week. Thank you very much, Swastika and Anusha, for leading off, and thank you for everybody who's made contributions. I think it's been a most comprehensive and valuable discussion that we've had this week, which will throw insight into the very interesting situation that's developing in Sri Lanka. So thank you again to everybody. Just going to move on now to Jimmy Kelly, who's going to tell us about next week's meeting.
Yeah, comrades, next week we have a speaker from Europe. His name is Colin O'Driscoll. Colin is British by birth, Irish by instinct and nature, but he's also been working as an academic and as an administrator in the European institutions. Colin is going to speak on the rise of fascism in Europe, and he's concentrating on the developments in Belgium, in France, and in the Netherlands. And he's using a term, creeping fascism, which showing the tactics of individuals presenting themselves as respectable people, in reality, vicious, parasitic fascists. But Colin has a long history in the labour movement, and in the last couple of years, he has been one of the leaders in the recreation of the Labour Party internationally under the ideas and policies of Jeremy Corbyn. He has been expelled, like so many other comrades on this platform, from the Labour Party at the moment. I think that about covers his comments.
Okay, Jimmy, that's it. Right, thank you very much. Well, the notification will go out about midweek about that meeting. So, please pass it on, the link on to anybody who you think might be interested. But other than that, just say thank you all for your attendance, and that's the end of it this afternoon. Hope we see you next week. Bye.